So it's time to move on to the next talk. This talk is a keynote speech by Allman, Chief Science Officer at Sendmail, entitled Internet Mail First Present and a Better the Future. I will introduce his biography. Allman is the original author of Sendmail and long-time contributor to Berkeley UNIX. He also wrote AMI macros, tset, trick, syslog, and invocation command. Besides Unix and Sendmail, he has worked on database management, Windows systems, neural net-based speech recognition, system administration, and networking. He is a Chief Science Officer and a co-founder of Sendmail Incorporated. Before joining Sendmail, he served as a CTO for Sift Incorporated, which is now part of 24/7 Media Inc. He was a developer and provided a large-scale research software infrastructure in the Mammoth project at UC Berkeley. He has contributed as a senior developer at the International Computer Science Institute to neural network system design. He was also chief programmer on the INGRES Relational database management system. Finally, he co-authored a C Advisor column for Unix Review magazine and was a member of the board of directors of the Unix Association. He is currently a program chair for the conference on email and anti-spam and a member of the ACMQ editorial review board and the board of trustees of Cloud Performances. He holds a Master of Science degree in computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. So please.
Okay. Make sure, can everyone hear me clearly? Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of, well, actually quite a bit of history about email and related technologies, starting really from before the internet existed. This is a talk that I gave a couple of years ago, and although there's a lot of slides, I'm going to try and go through it fairly quickly because the more interesting current stuff is toward the end. The current stuff will be some observations about spam and email security in general, and authentication and reputation, which is what I've been working on most recently. Then I'm going to give you some, everyone always wants to know what I think will be the future of email, and I always tell them I don't know any better than they do, but they insist on having me tell them, so I'll come up with a few things there. I've thrown in some stuff, by the way, about some other things that people have asked me about here, so I've tried to adjust the talk to be of interest to what people seem to want to hear. So first I want to talk about the prehistory of the internet. Really, this is the ARPANET, starting from 0 hosts on the network to 213, which is where the ARPANET peaked out. It couldn't go much larger than 213 because there was only an 8-bit host address. I'm going to talk plotting things on this kind of graph. This is date down at the bottom and then the number of hosts on the side. This is a linear scale, and I'll keep readjusting the scale as we move up. Otherwise, this would just be a flat line down at the bottom. So, come on. Yes, you can. All right. It's being picky. So, this is kind of an odd thing to start about the history of email. But it turns out this is about an awful lot of things. I just want to read you a quote that describes this event in December, on December 9th, 1968, Doug Engelbart, who by the way invented the computer mouse, and the group of 17 researchers working with him in the Augmentation Research Center at Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, presented a 90-minute live public demonstration of the online system NLS that they'd been working on since 1962. The public presentation was a session of the Fall Joint Computer Conference held at the Convention Center in San Francisco, and it was attended by about 1,000 computer professionals. This was the public debut of the computer mouse. But the mouse was only one of many innovations demonstrated that day, including hypertext, object addressing, and dynamic file linking, as well as shared screen collaboration involving two persons at different sites communicating over a network with audio and video interface. Okay, imagine that day. No network exists at all, and they're doing a remote demo with audio and video. They're interacting, doing screen sharing over the internet. They're showing off the mouse for the first time that nobody's ever seen, and he throws in stuff like hypertext and whatnot. I can only wish I was there. That must have been amazing. And the point of it, of course, is that back in 1968, they were demoing stuff that we've only recently gotten on the internet. So we haven't really come that far. So in September of 1969, the first ARPANET node was brought up. September 2nd, 1969 to be precise, which happens to be my birthday. It was a single host at UCLA, which is a little odd because you think of most networks as having at least two hosts on them, but for a while there was actually only one host on the ARPANET. This is a very smudged map of the original ARPANET. They had this thing called the IMP, the Interface Message Processor, which was essentially the routers that routed the data around the ARPANET, which wasn't particularly difficult in this case, but it became so later. And then a single host, which was a Sigma 7. This is obviously, by the way, somebody's hand-drawn slide that was done with those ink that gets easily smudged when you put your side of your hand on it. So fortunately, about one host a month, there were hosts added at SRI, University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah, which gave us a map like this. So you can see the round things here are the IMPs. There's 4 of them, and then each one has exactly one host hanging off of it. You could have up to 4 hosts connected to a single IMP, so it's kind of a mini star topology. But this is actually very important. Look at this, because it's already kind of an arbitrary network topology. It's not a star configuration, it's not a ring configuration, it's essentially an arbitrary hookup. And that actually is something that we had, or that industry had to rediscover as well. The other thing to notice is that there's an IBM 360, a Sigma 7, an XDS 940, and a PDP 10. There were no two identical architectures on the first ARPANET. It was designed right from the start to be heterogeneous. This was untrue of any network that you saw up until, or any other network. For example, Microsoft networks always assumed you were running Windows on the appropriate hardware. The ARPANET had a totally different view. Now here's just kind of a humor picture. This is John Postel. Sorry, it's not very good res. Steve Crocker and Vint Cerf. I have no idea what the pickles are about. But I do think it's interesting that here are probably the 3 people who were the fathers of the internet, and they couldn't even get it right. They got outputs connected to outputs and inputs to inputs. So it wasn't all that long before the network was quite a bit bigger. Notice it's gone cross-country now. I should point out that these links were really, really fast data links, 56 kilobit per second, and they cost a fortune. So the fact that they started off in one little cluster together on the West Coast was, I think, just to save costs as much as anything. But by September, they had spread out quite a bit. Now, the ARPANET was designed to share expensive resources. So lots of universities wanted to have their own computer, but computers were too expensive. So they could put in small machines that could you could connect to the larger machines with over the net. And so the two primary protocols at the time were Telnet and FTP. Email was not even considered in the original design of the ARPANET.
What do the T's mean?
The
Ames and MITRE?
Those were, they were called TIPs. They were essentially access, if you will, smart, well, not very smart nodes. They weren't actually computers. They were places you could log in. It would be just a terminal, if you will. So, BB&N had no computer there on the net, but they could log into the other places. That's fundamentally it. Okay, so in late 1971 was when the first network email was sent, as near as I can tell, first ever in all of history. It was sent by this guy, Ray Tomlinson, who is indeed the real father of email. People sometimes try and make me out to be that, but it just isn't true. He really is. He was working at Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, which was one of the contractors on the ARPANET. The original version was just part of FTP. You did a file transfer, and the special semantics were it would just append whatever you had onto the end of some fixed file. So each person would have an inbox, and you'd go splat and add your text to the end of their mailbox. I don't think they even had headers at the time. It was in late 1971, and it linked two machines that were creatively named BBNA and BBNB. There they are, the first two email hosts. Notice they're sitting right next to each other. So the first email was not sent around the world or anything like that. It stayed within a single room. These are PDP-10s, by the way. Just as a side note, really, 1171 Unix 1.0 came out. That was done by these folks, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Unix 1.0 wasn't particularly interesting from a network point of view, but we all know what eventually happened to Unix. So I'm kind of putting this into a historic context. So let's go to 1973. It was the beginning of a really, really exciting time at Berkeley. Not entirely because that was the year I entered Berkeley, but that was one of the reasons. And at the same time, there were people running around like this guy, Bill Joy, who had a lot to do with Berkeley UNIX, and this guy who's out there somewhere.
You have a better picture of him.
Well, trying to find a picture of him from that era, he's actually leaning down next to a truck that I think said leak detection unit on it. But he was only a little tiny bit, so I gave you that. This was another guy, another grad student. We always thought he was kind of arrogant because he said his goal was to grow up to be the CEO of a major corporation, which we thought was not something he just planned for. He's now CEO of Google after being CEO of Novell and so forth. So, gee, if I had only gone to biz school. So, as a result of these and a lot of other very creative people, there were just a huge number of people that ended up at Berkeley all at the same time who seemed to be really excited about this Unix stuff, and they came up with what's now known as Berkeley UNIX. So it was first Bill who did the Berkeley software distributions that were quite literally just a mag tape, and because of various licensing reasons, the best he could do, couldn't really even legally label the tape. He put a label out that said, "This is a tape of bits," and send it to you. This, by the way, is the first BSD mascot drawing. This is out of order because that didn't actually come until later. This was done by a guy who worked with Sam Leffler, who's also one of the Berkeley guys, at Pixar. His name was John Lasseter, and as you know, he now runs Disney Corporation. So Kirk owns the original art, which is probably worth a fortune now. So moving along, Merkle puzzles. Now Merkle puzzles, probably most of you have never even heard of. A guy named Ralph Merkle, grad student at Berkeley, submitted a proposal for a paper for CS244, which was rejected because it was an obviously absurd idea. It was, in fact, the basis for public key encryption. And without public key encryption, any kind of authentication and global encryption was completely impractical, because before that all we had were symmetric keys. So if there were n people on the network and you needed to exchange with them, you needed n squared copies of keys all over the place, and that you just couldn't deal with that as n got, you know, to really large numbers like 100. So the other thing was encryption was still classified by the US government as a munition, which means it wasn't legal to export it to other countries. And even back then, there was starting to be a substantial amount of international involvement with Unix and other such systems. So in April of '77, the RSA algorithm was finally published. This, of course, is the one that everyone knows about, but the work is directly based on Ralph Merkel's work. So by 1977, you can see that the network's gotten quite a bit larger. This was pretty close to its peak, I think. Actually, no, it still gets bigger than that. But we've got PDP-11s, PDP-10s. By the way, when I say different architectures, 16-bit words, 36-bit words, 60-bit words. What else do I have up here? Just all kinds of things. There's even some machines on there that had 20-bit words, 10-bit bytes, and somehow they managed to make that work. There's a couple of interesting things on here. They had satellite links to Hawaii and to Norway. And so the network had gone international, sort of. I say sort of because it was going to a U.S. Air Force base, I think, in Norway. So it was still considered a military thing at that point. So non-U.S. citizens weren't supposed to have access to it. UUCP got published in 1978. It brought network access of a sort to universities that didn't have DARPA contracts, which were kind of hard to get. And by the way, getting an ARPANET link was very expensive, so you pretty much needed to have a DARPA sponsor anyway just to be able to afford it. In May of 1978, the first ever spam was sent on the ARPANET. At the time, it was a deck salesman, and I'll tell you more about what he did shortly. Late 1979 was the appearance of Usenet, which was based originally on UUCP, although it could easily work over the ARPANET. It was the predecessor to what we would now call forums and blogs and things like that. But most importantly, it made flame wars possible. And then finally, in September 1979, UCB got an ARPANET node. There actually had been one before, but it had been shut down because the guy who ran it was told that he had failed to demonstrate that his research was going to enable them to build smarter bombs. Literally, I saw the letter. But by this point, the group I was working on, INGRES, got that link. We were a database management system, and of course the government was very interested in databases, and in particular distributed databases. We didn't have a very big grant, so we had a whopping 9,600 baud link to the ARPANET. This is for all of campus. Actually, it was for the CS division, which was not all of campus, but the folks in other departments didn't have any clue what a network was. But everyone in the CS division wanted access to the ARPANET, of course, because it was the newest shiny bling thing to have, and everyone had to get there. But we had a PDP-11 that really couldn't handle that many simultaneous logins, much less the ports that were expensive at the time. To put this into perspective, we had a PDP-1170. It had a 1.5 microsecond cycle time, so it was substantially less than 1 MIP, a 16-bit word, and we had a lot of memory. We had 196K of memory on the system. We would have had to have put DH11 ports, this is a port multiplexer, you get 16 ports, cost about $4,700, so about $300 per port, which doesn't sound like much, but remember back then it's like $1,000 per port today. So, well, I have to show off some things. This is a PDP 1170. This is what computers are supposed to look like, unlike what they are today. They had switches and lights and all kinds of cool things, dials, and so, oh, it was great. So we had, what we were able to do was release 2 TTY ports, 300 baud TTY ports, to be shared among everyone in the computer science division at Berkeley.
How many people was there?
Probably about 50 people, well, probably 40 professors. There were other students, but we just said no. You know, students can't have them. We can't possibly do that. But professors could have. They had computer or terminals, sorry, in their office, and they had a line that ran into the mail room, and there was a plug board, so you could put in a patch cord between your office and whichever computer you wanted to have access to. And there were 2 of those for the ARPANET machine, which was the machine I was working on then. And of course, people would come along, they'd want access to the ARPANET, they'd just unplug one of the cables that was in there and plug in theirs. There were professors having screaming matches at each other in the hallways. I think it probably came to fisticuffs at some point. And of course, they all came to me and wanted me to fix the problem, which I was an undergraduate then. I don't know how they thought I was going to fix the problem. What I did do, however, was observe that what they really wanted was not access to the ARPANET like FTP and Telnet and so forth. They wanted email. Email was the killer app, even back then. We had something called BerkNet, which linked our internal machines using RS-232 lines at 9600 baud. This was written by a guy named Eric Schmidt. Yes, the very same Eric Schmidt who's now CEO of Google, and he's a better CEO than he is a coder. But it worked, kind of. As it turns out, we also had a UUCP connection which ran from the main department machine, which was a VAX 11780 called Ernie Kovacs. And so I wrote something called DeliverMail. And DeliverMail was just a quick hack to forward messages between networks. It didn't attempt to do anything like fixing headers or anything like that. So it was a disaster in some sense waiting to be happen, but it got the professors off of my back. So as far as I was concerned, it was a success. It got released in 4.0, what is now 4.0 BSD. It was just 4 BSD at the time. In 1980, and much to my shock, it turned out to be very popular. Berkeley was not unique. Lots and lots of places had this problem. And so there's DeliverMail on the chart. Now you can see this is pretty much toward the end of the ARPANET era. The ARPANET geographically now looks like this. These circles, by the way, were exploded in the other material that I had, but I didn't want to give you all of that. But there's several satellite links now. There's a direct satellite link to London. There's still the Hawaii link, and so forth. If you look carefully, you'll see these remain university, military, and military contractor sites, all of them.
Yeah. We in Europe at the time were starting to connect with these, either in Sizemo was a big help for us.
Sizemo, I don't know that Sizemo had an ARPANET link. I don't think they did, although they could have.
It was just UUCP.
They would have been in here somewhere, so.
I thought it was our gateway to ARPANET we'd use.
I think that came later.
Oh.
Or, let's put it this way. We, Berkeley, ended up being the gateway between UUCP and the ARPANET. Because it didn't take people long to figure out how to route mail through there. You had to do it manually, but it could be done. I even have a little comment about that later. So let's continue on to the next phase. 1981 through 1988. This goes from the 213 hosts that were on the ARPANET up to 33,000 hosts in 7 years. So we'll start with our usual graph. This was when I started first putting SMTP into Sendmail. I had worked on Sendmail before because things like header rewriting was becoming a real problem. You couldn't reply to addresses. Everyone had to know. You had to be a guru in order to figure out how to address things. There was even an entire book put out that that described how to do addressing. But Berkeley got a contract to do the base platform, operating system platform to support DARPA research. They had all of these diverse machines, but they discovered that made it really hard for research projects to share their work with each other. So they decided that there would be a standard platform. It would be the VAX 11780 running Berkeley UNIX. And one of the things they needed was an SMTP server. Notice, by the way, I haven't said anything about SMTP being published. It wasn't published then. I was working on very early drafts. And what happened was Bill Joy asked me, remember I'm doing database research, not email, and Bill Joy came up to me and said, would you do this? And I, in a moment of weakness, said, sure, how hard can it be? 25 years later, I'm telling you, it's harder than it looks. And a few months later, 4.1a, which was technically a test release, came out with Sendmail in it, SMTP. This also had the first network stack. So this is Berkeley UNIX on the internet, except the internet doesn't exist yet. Sort of exists. There's this test platform, but the world's still using the ARPANET. Finally, about a year after I started implementing SMTP, the specs were published. Notice after it's been shipped. That's an internet tradition, by the way. January 1st, 1983 was the Flag Day. It was just called the Flag Day. That was the day that the government said we are going to turn off the ARPANET. And they literally just said we're going to send out a message that tells all of the imps to stop forwarding packets. And if you're not on the internet by then, you're going to lose your network connectivity. And there were a whole bunch of people who said, yeah, they're bluffing, and guess what? They lost their network connectivity. But Berkeley was there, we didn't. So that was cool. In September of '83, the same year, 4.2 BSD shipped. This was kind of the basis for, at least from the user interface, was the basis for Unix as we know it today. So it had all of the networking stuff. And at that point, we were able to track down John Lasseter and have him do an update because it seemed much more important at the time. So here's Beastie in color with the attractive green tennis shoes and so forth. Now, once again, for historic context, I have to throw in some things. In '85, there was a company, actually I did some more research. It was originally called Control Video Corporation, changed its name to Quantum Computer Services, and even later than that, changed its name to America Online. They had the walled garden, they had email, but only among other AOL subscribers. They weren't connected to the internet in any sense. This is really important. May 1987, a guy named Rick Adams, who worked at Seismo, went off and started the first commercial ISP. There was apparently another one that started on exactly the same day, so the two people get to fight with each other over who was first. The difference is that UUNet turned into one of the largest ISPs in the world, and the other one didn't. So this was the first time that you could get access to the internet without being a government sponsored. So that's a big deal. So next chunk of history we'll take from '88 to '93. At this point I'm going in about 10x growth on the internet just to keep the graphs pretty clear. So this was kind of the first security incident on the internet. The internet worm. It was written by a grad student at Harvard who probably should have flunked out because he didn't understand combinatoric growth. And he really thought that this thing would run quietly on the internet. And first of all, there was a bug in his program, so it didn't kill itself off when it was supposed to. And he didn't understand that if each machine infects 4 machines, that's a really large power, not a small one. But it did make people start to think for the first time about security on the internet. Up until then, the internet had been kind of very collegiate atmosphere. You had to be, up until UUNet, you had to be a researcher to get on it. If you wanted an account on somebody else's machine, you typically, all you had to do was say, can I have an account? And they'd go, sure, and give you an account. So security didn't seem all that important, but this made it clear that it was. March 1989, in fact, exactly 20 years ago this past Friday, 2 days ago, Tim Berners-Lee proposed what we now know as the World Wide Web. He did a prototype browser. It was published in October of 1990, and but that one kind of disappeared. He was working at CERN, a research organization in Switzerland. So there's Tim. I think that's not contemporary. I think he had more hair when he proposed it. Okay. We had UUNet, and that allowed non-government people to get access to the net. But the backbone of the internet was still run by the National Science Foundation. It had gotten transferred from the military over to non-military government funding, but it was still funded. And their rules, they had an acceptable use policy that said no commercial traffic. Now, so UUNet customers could run commercial traffic to each other, but they couldn't run it to other people if there was any chance that would run over these wires. That effectively said you can't use the internet for commercial purposes at all. CIX, which stood for Commercial Internet Exchange, was where the various largish ISPs, which tended to be regional then, so there'd be one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast and one in the Southeast and so forth, said, we're all going to run wires together into one room. We're going to put a big router there, and we're going to be able to exchange traffic with us without ever going over NSFnet, because we're not allowed to send commercial traffic there. And they essentially said, we're going to cut the government out of the equation, which was great because that's what the government wanted anyway. So 1991, July, was the first time you could really use the internet for anything commercial. 1992, multi-purpose internet mail extensions was published at a Unix conference. And this allowed embedding of something other than plain text into email messages. Notably, at the time, it was used for pictures and graphs and things like that. There was discussion about maybe someday we could do sound, and possibly way in the distant future we might think about video, but it was really just pictures. Okay, 1993 through 96, this is taking us from 1.3 million to almost 13 million. February of 93, NCSA Mosaic was released. This is the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. It was the first broadly used browser, and in fact, that was the direct descendant, direct parent of Netscape and Mozilla and so forth. It all kind of goes back to NCSA Mosaic. Now, Sendmail had been, I had kind of abandoned Sendmail for a number of years because I'd gone to work for a startup and they seemed to want me to actually work on what I was being paid for. And Sendmail had diverged. And so there were many versions of it. Some of them had some good ideas, some of them some not so good ideas. Every vendor, like DEC and HP and IBM and so forth, had their own proprietary version of Sendmail, and you couldn't really share things between them. And I came along at some point. I went back to the university, merged a lot of these things in, added a bunch of other things, and released things as Sendmail 8, which is the Sendmail that's pretty much still exists to this day. That was way more successful than I had anticipated, and that turned into a problem later, as you'll see. Netscape was founded in 1994. Mark Andreessen was one of the principals in that, and he essentially left NCSA, took the source code with him, and founded a company. The green card spam. Anyone remember the green card spam? Now, I mentioned that there was the first spam earlier, but it wasn't really spam. As I said, the network previously had been largely cooperative. You know, we had flame wars, but they were mostly innocent, could be dealt with. Turns out spam was not new. The first known electronically transmitted commercial message was in September 13th, 1904, using the telegraph. So advertisers had figured out that this new technology was going to be someplace they could thrive. The first email spam was this DEC salesman who DEC had released a new product, a new computer, and he decided that he really wanted all of his customers to know about this. So he sent an email message with copying every single customer that he had. Well, it turns out the mail programs of the time, they thought about having, 3 or 4 or maybe 10 recipients on a message, not 1,000. And so it broke the mail system, it broke all kinds of things. But I don't really count that as the first big spam because he said, gee, I didn't know. He apologized. He wasn't trying to do anything malicious. He genuinely thought that his customers would want to know about this new machine. There was also in 1988 a chain letter called Make Money Fast, which was a pyramid scheme. But it wasn't really technically a spam either. But we're definitely seeing the greed is good attitude coming to the internet, much to the disgust of a lot of us. And the culmination was 2 lawyers from Texas, Cantor and Siegel, who advertised in, technically this was on Usenet, not email. They sent to every single news group the same posting offering to sign people up for a price for the green card lottery, which was so people, non-U.S. citizens, could work in the U.S. They didn't tell you that you could sign yourself up for free. But if you gave them money, they'd be happy to do for you what you could already do for free. And they were completely unapologetic about this. They said, wait a minute, it's here. We have the right to do this. They even published a book on how to spam. And they made a ton of money off of that book, too. I believe they've both been disbarred, by the way, and have gone into, who knows? They're gone. April 1994, web crawler was the first full-text web crawler and was the beginning of search engines as we know them today. The first, well, this is a pseudo-virus. Good Times virus was an email message that went around saying, the subject was Good Times. It said, there's a virus running around the network. If you even open that message, it will trash your machine. You can know the message because it has the subject Good Times. Forward this to everyone you know. The warning was itself the virus, and it was tremendously effective. I had to spend about 2 days calming down people about this, just saying, no, don't forward it. As I had said earlier, Sendmail 8 was very, very successful. So successful that I really couldn't support it myself anymore. It was just becoming untenable. So I formed the Sendmail Consortium, which was a group of volunteers that helped do this in '95. And later in '95, SMIME was published. This was the first attempt to do Well, actually, it wasn't the first. It was the best known to this day attempt to do encryption and authentication in email.
When was the BAT book published?
The BAT book was published, I don't remember exactly when, but I think it was in about 94.
Yeah, right in this time.
Right in this time frame. This is 96 to 2000, going from about 13 million to 109 million hosts. Hotmail was founded. I thought this was insane at the time, which shows why I'm not filthy rich right now. Hotmail, you had to have access to the internet, so I said, well, of course you've already got a mailbox. They gave you out free mailboxes, and it took off like mad. It was crazy. In 97, Microsoft said, hey, wait a minute, maybe this internet thing isn't going to go away after all, and we should get in on it. And so they put a very bad SMTP gateway into Exchange. They slapped the network onto their existing workgroup tools, which were not designed for a hostile environment at all. They did no consideration whatsoever of security and just dropped a huge number of people on the internet, essentially naked and unprotected. And we're still dealing with this to this day. The only thing that was impressive about this was Microsoft, in a very short period of time, was able to completely redefine the company as an internet company, and much faster than anyone had thought was possible. Yahoo was founded in October 97. You all know about that. Microsoft acquired Hotmail. They weren't able to do it as fast as they wanted. The rumor, unconfirmed, is that they paid $400 million for this company that was barely over a year old and had something like 10 employees. Quite a coup. In March of 98, I and a friend of mine co-founded Sendmail Inc. Sendmail, even with the help of the consortium, was still stuck with resource problems, and so we said we can commercialize this. Here's a very low-res picture of the initial people in the company, and two of us are still there. Now we get into the virus era. In March of 99, Melissa, it was an Outlook macro virus. Yes, here we are with Microsoft. It was really kind of a worm as much as it was a virus. In January of 2000, the government finally relaxed the encryption policy. They finally admitted that everyone outside the US had encryption anyway, and so we might as well be able to play in the game with the rest of the world. We immediately put encryption, TLS encryption, into Sendmail. In fact, we already had it implemented, but we couldn't release it. And so this came out. We pushed out the version that already had TLS. What we wanted to do was, had the government changed their mind, we wanted it to be too late. So we got it out really fast. They didn't change their mind, but they may have not changed their mind because they realized it was, 2 weeks later it was too late. In March of 2000, we released an interface called Milter. This is a way to do plugins into Sendmail that allow you to do mail filtering. It was specifically designed for anti-spam. The MTA market changed a lot back then, or I shouldn't say the market, but the world, because it had been about reliability and getting mail from A to B without losing it. And around here was when spam was getting so bad, people said, no, what we need to do is not forward anything that might be problematic. In April 2000, the I Love You virus. This was a Visual Basic virus. You had to click on it, but it turns out that people couldn't resist clicking on attachments called I Love You. They were sad, what can I say? 2001 to the present. We've gone from that 110,000 roughly up to about 440 million as of the last survey I could find. Well, let's see. Let's start off with the Anna Kournikova virus. It was kind of one of the same olds. Postfix, which was a competitor to Sendmail, was released then. Postfix was actually a really good alternative. And Vitsa and I, when he was writing Postfix, Vitsa and I exchanged a lot of email talking about it. I talked with him at one point before it was released, and it had taken, shall we say, much longer than he expected. And I sat down, asked him how the mailer was going, and he said, well, it's taken longer than I thought. And I said, it's harder than it looks, isn't it? He said, it's been an exercise in humility. So you'd think that I'd hate him because he's a big competitor of Sendmail, but no, he's one of the good guys. The SPF project, which was one of the first attempts to do email authentication in one sense or another, started up in 03. Also in 03 was the sobig.f worm. It was the largest attack to date. It used something called .pif files, program information files, as an attachment. It was significant because it contained its own SMTP engine. Up until then, things had been piggybacking on Exchange, and so submitting mail as though you were the user submitting it from Outlook. This one had an SMTP engine optimized for sending out trash. It had adaptive content, so it kept changing itself, so it was hard to build fingerprints, and it self-destructed on a particular date. So Sobig actually just kind of disappeared on one day. I don't think anybody knows why. Yahoo started working on domain keys, which is another technology for doing authentication. I'll talk about both that and SPF later. The MyDoom virus came out. It was even spread faster and was even bigger than Sobig. Its big innovation was it propagated using peer-to-peer networking as well as email. And it was specifically designed to infect machines to use them as spam engines. So arguably this was the beginning of zombie farms. In February 04, Microsoft announces Sender ID, which was really kind of SPF with some syntactic sugar. And in December 04, DKIM work began. DKIM was an extension of domain keys. There was some experience with domain keys, and we realized that there were some things that needed to have improved and so forth. I was very much involved in the DKIM work, so that's unfortunately 5 years that I've been working on this stuff now. And in 07, the actual DKIM-based signing spec was released, much to our relief. Different tech. Some of the early RFCs for EAI were published in just toward the end of last year. EAI is email address internationalization. And the idea is you've been able to send around text in Japanese and so forth. There were hacks so that you could have domain names in Japanese, but you couldn't have the email address be in Japanese. EAI says we want it to be completely 100% internationalizable, all through email, which is a good thing. And so a lot of people don't realize that the venerable RFC 28, 21, and 22, which were the internet mail specs for years, were actually just recently updated. So the new numbers you have to memorize are 5321 and 5322. This was the latest map that I could find, so it's pretty old. Back in 1999, Bill Cheswick produced this. This does not show the hosts on the internet. This shows the ISPs on the internet. And I won't go into any more detail on this, and I'm afraid I don't recall what the coloring is. So let me get into the next phase here. Broadly, messaging, spam, security, and authentication. So let's talk about spamming a little bit. I wasn't going to talk about spamming, but ever since I got here, people have been asking me about it. So there's still a lot of interest about it, obviously. Spam is arguably an economic issue. The cost to send a message is far lower than the cost to receive it. If this were true of physical junk mail, a dump truck would pull up to my house every day and just dump all the junk mail off on my lawn. But it's not, fortunately. Notice that that cost function isn't necessarily about dollars or yen or anything like that. It's not currency. It can be things like CPU time, memory usage, human time, etc. Notice that every single thing we've tried to do to protect ourselves from spam up until this point has increased the cost to the receiver. So as we put in more and more anti-spam filtering, we've actually moved this function to be more advantageous for the spammer. It's a little strange. Now there are a bunch of possible approaches. There's of course content filtering, which is what people normally do, for example, naive Bayesian filters and so forth. This is getting pretty close to its limits, and it doesn't fix the cost function. E-postage, which is where you really do use some kind of money, e-cash, attach it to each message. Unfortunately, we need a pretty huge infrastructure to do all that payment processing, and there's a lot of bickering about how to do that. And acceptance problems. People go, but it's always been free. I refuse to pay anything to send a message. It's like, we're going to ask you to do 1/10 of a cent, 100th of a cent per message. No, that's too expensive. I can't afford it. So there are some legitimate concerns about some mailing lists, that sort of thing. There are workarounds. Challenge response is popular. When you get mail from somebody that you've never talked to before, you send them back a challenge. If they respond, you assume that there's a human being on the other end and you let the mail through. Unfortunately, a lot of people get the challenges and think they're spam, so they never reply. It doesn't scale well. It's particularly bad for automated systems that are trying to send out mail, like your bank sending you your bank statements. Just don't respond well to challenge response. Hash cache is a technique to do essentially e-postage, but by using time, CPU time, memory, whatever. It's completely useless with zombie farms because they're not burning their own resources, they're burning some victim's resources, so what's the point? Gray listing is where when you get a message from somebody that you've never seen before, you do a temporary failure on it and wait for them to come back, because spammers generally don't have a queue because a queue is expensive. But it turns out they don't actually have to have a queue because they don't change the message very much. They just need to keep trying these things multiple times. They don't even have to keep track of what happened before. They just try multiple times. If 3 copies of their message get through, all the better. And of course, authentication. This is if we know who actually sent the message, maybe we can hunt them down and kill them. Or maybe not kill them, maybe something a little less. But it's insufficient by itself. People go, oh, well, if it's authenticated, then it's good, right? Well, no. The spammer can't authenticate as themselves. So just saying it's authenticated doesn't mean it's still something you want to read. So let me just talk about phishing a little bit. Phishing and spamming are not quite the same thing, although there's often a lot of overlap. Phishing is trying to trick somebody into giving up some kind of private information. It's often to get bank account information or other things you need to do identity theft. Okay, it's not limited to do email, and it's not new. The Nigerian or 419 spam was working in physical mail long before it hit email. I have personally received those badly typed letters that were exactly a 419 spam. Hi, I'm a Nigerian dictator who needs to get $100 million out, and you have been identified as a trustworthy ... Shysters have been prying on the elderly as long as there have been elderly, so forth. None of this is new. Now, there's 2 basic forms of phishing. One is what I'm calling here shotgun phishing, which is really just send out these things to enough people and hope that somebody's stupid enough to bite, which works, by the way, unfortunately. There are still people who think you can get something for nothing. But what's being called spear phishing is actually pretty bad. This is where they actually spend a fair amount of time researching an individual. They do a custom-made message, I have received some of these things that, for example, claim to be from the IRS, saying that Sendmail Inc. Something or other about there's been something with some of our forms somewhere, and it is absolutely urgent that we contact so-and-so immediately, or else they will be regretfully forced to freeze all of our bank accounts, and so forth. They know who I am, they know I'm an officer with the company, so forth. Another thing that people will do is people will throw away the bank statements and things that have the last 4 digits of your account number on it, which is perfectly safe because they don't have the whole account number, right? Well, wrong. Then they pull that out, dumpster diving. They send you a letter claiming to be from your credit card provider. They have the last 4 digits of your account number. They give you exactly the same information that your legitimate credit card company would give you. And that's a lot easier to trick people. They can spend significant money targeting someone. So one other thing about phishing, though, which is like the credit card one I just described, attackers often try and pretend to be someone you trust. And authentication can actually help with that. If it claims to be from my bank and it's provably not from my bank, then we're done. So, authentication. There's really 2 forms of authentication. And the standards and sender ID and SPF fall into the path-based class, which is where you look how the message got to you, who's sending the message to you, and is it plausible that they would be sending a message claiming to be from my bank. Okay, or signature-based, which is where you use public key encryption to put a digital signature on the message. Neither of these authenticate users, they authenticate domains because of the key management problems. And both of them can break on totally non-malicious messages. So it's not perfect. DKIM potentially could work consistently if we could get the entire network to never munge a message, which probably can happen in 100 years or so. How do you get adoption on this? You know, who wants to be the first person who signs a message? Well, we expected the recipients would want that because they want to protect themselves, but it turns out it's been the senders, like the banks, that have really, really been pushing this. Okay, plus some of the more forward-looking places like Google have been using both DKIM and SPF for some time. One important thing for a transition period, you have to allow unsigned mail to come in because that's the way it's always been. And so you can't just break the world. We will never have another Flag Day on the internet like that again. It just can't happen at this point. So what you'd like is for the bank to be able to somehow tell you, I sign all of my messages. So if you get an unsigned message that claims to be from me, it's not from me. And that's in the area of author domain signing practices, ADSP. And this is very controversial and still stuck in the working group. I want to emphasize that authentication is not enough because spammers can authenticate. And we can't leave it to humans either because of things like cousin domains. The eBay-billing.com was a famous one that was not associated with eBay in any way and was trying to defraud people. So let me talk a little bit about DKIM, which is what I've been working on mostly. It's really 2 specifications. One is the signature, the base standard, which tells how to sign and verify a message. And I put a lot of work into that one. The other one is the signing practices, which is how to interpret unsigned messages. And that one has gotten laden down in the working group, and at this point I'm kind of walked away from it because it's amazing how many hours people can spend arguing about the meaning of relatively simple words. The way you can get away with it is to use DNS to distribute your public keys. Since public keys can indeed be public, you leverage off of this existing global distributed database to get the keys out. This is a little unusual because normally you don't have something that is so simple to do this. We do not, by the way, use certs. We don't have a signing tree or anything like that. It's just the key pair, because since you're asking the purported Sendmail to give you their public, or purported sender to give them their public key, give you their public key, I'll get it, you presumably can trust them, presumably. There are people who would like to put certs into this to give additional security that probably will go through at some point, but it probably won't be necessary.
What's the additional security that gives you?
Possibility of theft of keys. One of the nice ones is if you get mail that is signed from a domain you don't know about, how do you know that that's a good domain or not? Well, reputation, which I'll get to, is the major approach. But if you had it signed by something that had a cert, so the key itself was signed by someone else, you could ask, is that a trusted party? And that gives you, it's not really reputation, it's called accreditation. And it sort of gives you a poor man's accreditation. There are also, of course, the places that want to have us move towards certs because they make a living selling certs. And so they think this is a fine idea.
Well, even if eBayBilling.com was certified, as being eBayBilling.com, they still would be a rogue domain.
Sure.
So that's the part I never understood about what certs bought you, other than you've given money to somebody and they're happy.
If you have built into your browser a bunch of certs that are trusted, or I should say signing authorities that are trusted, okay, because you believe that they're not going to just arbitrarily sign anyone's key. Exactly the same thing for email.
Well, they're not guaranteeing you are who you say you are. They're not guaranteeing you're not a bad guy.
You can, first of all, imagine places that would actually check for you, make sure that you're legitimate, that you at least have a mailing address that really works, that the people who claim to own the company actually exist, simple things like that. And somebody could make a fair amount of money being a certifying agency that essentially refused to sign anything where they hadn't checked you out first, vetted you. Okay, and there are places that do that for the web as well. But you're right, some of them are, $10, of course we'll sign your key. No problem. Sometimes it's not that expensive. And I already talked about signing practices. Unfortunately, it's gotten watered down to the point where, in my opinion, it's not terribly useful anymore. So reputation is the usual way you deal with it. The message, I've proven now that the message comes from eBayBilling.com, okay, because I've gotten their public key, it verifies, so forth. It's definitely mathematically provable. But do I want to talk to eBayBilling.com? Do I want to believe them? Do I want to click on that link? And the usual approach is reputation. What do we know about eBayBilling.com? Now, reputation has been around for a long time in the form of DNS black hole lists. That's only negative reputation. It can't say that a domain is good. It can only say that it's bad. And of course, bad guys are switching around IP addresses all the time. So those lists are always stale. So in fact, it's helpful, but it's not actually all that great. The main advantage it gives you is they can black hole huge address spaces that are, for example, dial-up IP address space, because they know nobody should ever be sending mail from those domains that don't go through their provider's mail services. And that actually does help a lot. Positive reputation, on the other hand, is really hard to do, in part because it breaks the world as we know it. So right now, there is, in some sense, a presumption of innocence when you receive an email from somebody. You've never seen it before? Well, it might be legitimate. Maybe I'll spam check it, and so forth. But it might be legitimate. If you go to a world where you look that up and say, well, if they have no known reputation, then it's probably bad, because it's probably a spammer, because they generate 1,000. I can't remember what the number is now, but it's thousands of new domains come online every day for spammers. They exist only for a day or so, and then they go away. You can send a lot of email in a day. So how does a small player join the club without having a positive reputation to begin with? A legitimate small player. This is still an unsolved problem. We may end up going to a closed society. If you don't have somebody to introduce you, then you can't get your mail through. This has actually been true in human society for a long, long time. So it's not the end of the world, but it does have some unfortunate implications. And there's going to have to be exceptions. Sales at anything.com probably isn't going to want to reject mail from people they haven't heard of before. I will point out, challenge response is an attempt to essentially create a closed society with a test in there, if you will, a crude Turing test to try and see if there's a human being on the other end of the line. And there's a lot of places that would love to do accreditation, which is where they'll say, I'll vouch for you for a fee. Even having them pay some money does have value because they have to give a credit card number and it has to go through the credit card service. So you're essentially leveraging off the credit cards companies' work on reputation, but it doesn't handle the possibility, the likelihood of stolen credit cards. So what a lot of people say is, well, why don't we just use another media? Let's go to instant messaging. Yes, well, instant messaging doesn't have spam at all. That's why I get messages pretty much every day from so-and-so sexy teenage foxy girls wanting to get it on with me. Spam, as it's called, has been a problem for a while and is getting bad fast. Authentication helps, but it's just too easy to get an account. Social networking targets. Hey, what's the problem? We'll just use social networking and we'll use that for all of our email, and so you've got to be a friend of mine. Well, it turns out just recently there's been a lot of publicity about worms and viruses that go into MySpace and Facebook and whatnot, and you will accidentally send this spam to your friends. It legitimately comes from you, and so they are more likely to trust you. So this is actually almost worse than email spam. And SPIT for internet telephony spam over internet telephony is, let's just politely say, a growth industry which is going to get unbelievably bad sometime soon. So some speculations on the future here. These are speculations. My opinion, I can't justify them in any way. In the short term, I think we will get some authenticated mail out there. There will be some sender reputation. It will grow with time. It won't grow as quickly as I'd like. Okay, but it will happen and it will start to grow. And it will be useful, if only because when you can get enough people that have authenticated and they have good reputation, the probability that the other mail is spam goes up, so you can actually turn up your spam filter sensitivity. So if you will, it will be a whitelist around existing spam filters, not something that exists by itself. We will see movement toward email address internationalization. Once again, it's going to be relatively slow. The reason for that is because there's a hard problem in that, which is downgrading a message from an internationalized mail, which, by the way, what they're looking at is saying we're going to use UTF-8 for everything. We're not going to declare the character set. We just use UTF-8, which is what they should have done years ago. But taking a UTF-8 message and downgrading it to an ASCII message is almost impossible. And I've actually put the EAI extensions into Sendmail. I haven't released them yet. And I've tried to do the downgrading and finally came to the conclusion that there's certain things where you just have to guess. And you're not going to guess right all of the time. So my inclination is to say, I will not allow downgrading. It's just going to fail and the message will bounce back and you have to send a downgraded message to begin with. That will slow adoption. And a lot of people, young people in particular, are moving off of SMTP-based mail. They're going into things like writing on people's walls and Facebook, microblogging, instant messaging, so forth. That is going to continue. Okay, but a lot of people say, partially because people have been moving on to these things, that SMTP is dead. But I say if SMTP is dead, long live SMTP. SMTP is not going away for a lot of reasons. Now, there are some things that could be helped with this. One of the big proposals is to switch from a push model of email where the sender connects to the recipient, says, here's the mail, take it, to a pull model where the recipient just sends a short message saying, I have mail for you here, and then the recipient calls back for it when it's convenient for them to do so. That does shift the cost function, so that the sender actually has to have some infrastructure there. They have to be prepared to store this mail, etc. But it's still going to be in the SMTP structure, I think. The SMTP is extensible and you can do almost anything with the extensions. It's going to be good enough for a long time. I think in the medium term we will succeed at getting UTF-8 absolutely everywhere. That the only people who only do ASCII email will be the people who build SMTP servers into their printers and they can't go out and upgrade them. So I'm pretty optimistic on that. And most email is going to end up being at hosted providers. It's gotten so much harder to run an email server now than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago for a lot of reasons. Legality reasons, for example. There's a lot of new laws that apply to email and retention and so forth. You really kind of want to push that off onto somebody else who can worry about it. So lots of companies, for example, who used to run their own mail servers are moving to Gmail. And I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see a lot more of that. I don't think we'll get to the place where there are 3 companies in the entire world that have mailboxes, although there would actually be certain advantages to that. It won't get anywhere like that, but small companies just don't want to deal with it. So some longer term thoughts. Casual messaging will indeed continue to move away from SMTP-based mail. You see more and more stuff going through Facebook, more and more stuff going through instant messaging. People crave instant gratification, and IM gives them that and email doesn't. It also fits better with mobile usage, and is there anyone in this room who is not carrying one of these? Anyone who wants to admit that they're a Luddite? I didn't think so. But email is not going to die. It's been predicted, but that's just not true. It's too well suited to business. It's too well suited to places where you have to send a longer message. You have to think about what you're saying before you send it. If you've got security and regulatory issues, there are real problems with instant messaging. One of the things that's a totally artificial problem is that texting, SMS, costs a lot of money, like 2 cents a text. It costs the cell companies 0 to do that, effectively 0. And they put this cost on it, and they're making a fortune off of it. And that will be enough. People say, I don't want to pay 1/10 of a cent for email, but they're willing to pay 2 cents for an SMS. This is crazy. I'm hoping that will go away. The other thing is that as you get into the business world, more and more you're dealing with people across time zones. When you're a hacker and you're up around the clock anyway, that's not such a big deal. But when you start to get into the more conventional world, you actually kind of want to keep, you get married, you have kids, you start to go on to a more conventional schedule. The distinction between email, instant messaging, and even voice is going to blur. It's already blurring, and I think it'll blur even more than that. I actually am going to talk about that a little bit in the next slide. And I think there's a lot of very interesting work to be done in the computer-human interface of email. Right now, email started off as just an inbox. Here's a pile of memos, you go through them. It's gotten to the point where it's sort of like a dumb secretary who can sort out the junk mail and give you the rest of it. Email needs to be, or I should say e-messaging, needs to be like a really good executive admin who knows what it is you're doing, can deal with, can not just sort out the bad stuff, but can actually answer the stuff where it's not a difficult thing, who can sort the things into an order and say, this is the most important thing for you to deal with right now, who will remind you when some important meeting is coming up, who will, when you've called a meeting and people haven't responded, will go off and ping them about it, etc., etc. There's huge amounts of work that can happen here. Which gets me to unified messaging. I'm almost done, don't worry. There are too many messaging services and applications out there. There's too much overlap and there's not enough compatibility. I want to show you a little chart that I made up just in the last couple days. All of the services and applications on this chart are ones I personally use. So, just run through this. What did I do? Oh, there it is. So, we start with ADM. It originally started out as an IM application. Okay, it does IM, it does SMS in the later versions. It doesn't do voice or video. Since it doesn't do voice, we don't have to worry about the call stuff or VM or whatever. It does have its own address book. Okay, Skype does do voice. It was designed originally as a voice application, but it's got IM thrown in. It's got video now. It will do call forwarding. For additional money, you can do, I guess I should have said, for additional money, these plus signs are almost all indicate that money exchanges hands. You can do SMS or incoming or outgoing calls. So I have an outgoing Skype line, but no incoming Skype line. Google Voice, which was up until a couple of days ago was called Grand Central, has instant messaging, does not have instant messaging, but the note 3 there is that there's Google Talk as well. And so in some sense it's closely related. So that's kind of a yes. It does do SMS, it does do voice. It doesn't do video yet. It does have incoming calls. In fact, that's the whole point of Google Voice. You can do outgoing calls in the US. You have to pay extra if you want to do international outgoing calls. It does have call forwarding. Well, that's what it was designed to do. And recently you can actually call forward not just to a regular phone number on what's called the PSTN, public something telephone network. Sorry, I should know that. Public switch, yeah. I've got it written down right here, no wonder I couldn't find it. It can also go to VoIP-only numbers. So you can actually set up a VoIP account that has no way to call in from a regular telephone, but in fact Grand Central can forward it to you. So, which is what I'm using. Well, let me get to this. Broad Voice is a service I've had for a while. It's just a for-pay VoIP service. It only does voice. Okay, it does have incoming calls, and of course you always get one. But I also have a local number in the UK, which rings my phone in Berkeley for various reasons. So there's some tricky things you can do there, and it does all the incoming, outgoing calls, and so forth. Gizmo I just started playing with recently. It's a soft phone. I have it on this machine here. It's got IM, it's got SMS, it's got voice. It does have video. Okay, for additional money, you can do incoming and outgoing calls, but those aren't free, except for incoming VoIP calls. But so that's kind of another thing. It can do call forwarding. It does have voicemail, and like everything here, it's got its own address book, which, by the way, are in general not integrated with one another. So you have to have one address for each contact that you want. You have to have them in 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different address books. And of course, iChat I use primarily because I need to do screen saving to help out my mom when she has a problem and I don't want to drive up to her house. I won't go into all of these details except to note there's almost no integration on address book, which is a disaster. These things overlap in major ways. I've got a Google Voice number now that can forward to my laptop when I'm on the road, but it also rings at home. But I don't have a way to get that UK number to follow me around, even though I'd like to, because I can't quite seem to get the integration going properly yet. And what you have today is, in the modern messaging, you have the equivalent of this. For any of you who were around in the day of deliver mail, that's what an email address would look like. That was an original email, or a real legitimate email address.
Forgot percent.
I did forget percent. I couldn't figure out how to put that in there.
And it could be Kremvax instead of just...
It could be Kremvax, yes. All right.
There's 2 in everything.
So I'm going to toss in some gratuitous advertising here. If you're interested in email and e-messaging, the conference on email and anti-spam is coming up in July in Mountain View. Take a look at the website that's there. So thank you very much. And are there any questions? I answered everything. Oh, that's so cool. You're so lying. None at all? Okay, well, I guess we get to get out a little early for coffee then. I will be around the rest of the day if you want to ask anything else. Oh, yes?
When do you release Sendmail X?
Sendmail X was not something I was doing. I started off with the initial design. A guy named Klaus Hausmann was working on it. We concluded at the company that Sendmail X was not going to be significantly better than Postfix, and it certainly wasn't going to be ready anytime soon. Klaus is a great coder, but he's a very careful coder, and that means he's not really all that quick. And so we looked at it and said, it's not worth it to us to do this. He has renamed it Meta 1, MTA1, and it's out there on, I think it's either mta1.org or Meta, META1.org. I don't remember which. And so you can download it, but I don't know how heavily he's working on that now. Okay, as I said, by the way, I'm working on some stuff in Sendmail 8, mostly stuff like the EAI extensions and whatnot. I don't know when or if that's going to get released. It is not a priority for the company right now, and so what I'm hoping to do is do a private release, alpha, do not use this under any circumstances, etc. kind of release. But we'll see. Yes?
Do you have any numbers on what the distribution of the different MX agents are? You know, is Sendmail still top?
So the question is, who owns the market?
Is we leverage SMTP to turn around the cost? You mentioned something about here I have a message from you, come and get it. That could be combined maybe with some keys and so on. You can go check on this information and, oh yeah, I'm going to go get it or not. And you could actually leverage SMTP to do it.
Okay, so there's 2 things there. One is, do I have any stats on what software mail servers are using? That information, there used to be some places that did it and published it for free. They have started charging money for it, a lot of money for it. And so I don't have anything really recent, but from what I can determine piecing together, Sendmail is still the largest MTA in terms of numeric numbers out there. I believe Microsoft's number 2. Sendmail, though, is around 30% or something like that, and Microsoft's around maybe 20%, and then everyone else breaks up the 50%. So, but I'm afraid that's speculation and interpolation and that sort of thing. The second question is, can we use leverage SMTP to improve the situation? Yes, I'd love to do that. There was a time when that would have been easier for me, when literally 70% of the network was running Sendmail, and they mostly upgraded fairly quickly. I no longer have that kind of leverage, and people have gotten much more reluctant to upgrade their mail servers over time. Now, if I could talk Vitsa into doing it too, then we might actually have something a little more interesting. If I could talk Microsoft into it, but yeah, like that's likely. So,
but the window of opportunity could be closing.
The window of opportunity could be closing, and once again, I would love to do that. It is just not. I do work for a commercial company, and it is not reasonable for them to pay me to do that right now. It's not a priority, and so I can do it on my own if I would like. And I am doing some stuff on my own, but there are limits to what I can do. I'm afraid I'm a little older than I was 25 years ago. So I can no longer pull those all-nighters every night for a week. Any other questions? Silence. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.